Okay, so let's see the practical app you are going to develop at the end of these lessons. So this is the source code you will be developing, and once you run it, you will see a web application, and this is a survey system. You are going to develop a real world survey system, and this is a complete project where the admin can log in, can register if they want, or they can log in using their previous credentials. Likewise, and sign in, and then admin will be taken to the admin dashboard, which has lots of options such as to define the questions. These are all coming from the database dynamically, and you will learn how to add, edit, delete the data and populate the data dynamically likewise, and define the questions so the data will appear dynamically. And then you will learn how to create settings pages and save the data to the database once again, and see who are the respondents who has taken this survey, and with the log information. You will learn how to create sophisticated search dashboards, and you will learn about how to filter data and search, where admin can find information about different users who has taken the survey. So and then if I log out, and then a normal user, if a normal user comes to the home page, a normal user can start taking the survey. A user can register if needed, or if not, a user can take it anonymously. User will be able to take this anonymously. Let's say if this is test2 user, so test2 at, so, and if user says no, I don't want to register, and if user says next, then the survey will start anonymously, and all the data is coming from the database. So you learn about connecting to a remote database, which is not in this computer, it's on a remote server. So you will learn how to do that, and then you will learn how to take the survey questions, and there will be multiple survey questions. So I will just fast forward this. So I fast forwarded the questions, I just click next and answered them. And final question is, what is the state? So if the user says okay, this is the state, and click next, and these are the questions I answered. So and then the user or the respondent can review them and submit the answers. So then the data will go into the remote database. So you will learn about how to save it, and click next, and then it takes the user or the respondent back to the home page. So this is the app you will be developing at the end of these lessons. And the specialty of this app is it's a data driven app, and it's completely dynamic, and all the data is coming from the database, and there is admin dashboard, a sophisticated admin dashboard, and a separate user sessions. You will learn the complete source code from the scratch to develop this. So let's go and develop this application now. Let's start doing it now. Hi everyone, welcome to the lesson ASP.NET Complete Project Service System Part 2 Database Intro. So this is the continuation of the complete project service system, and let's see about the database. We'll be using these tools for this lecture series, and make sure you cover these prerequisites before you start this lesson. We'll be talking about the ER diagram and the relational model here. So this is a survey system, and you saw the demo clip of the system in the previous lecture. So over here, let's look at the ER diagram. So in the according to what you saw in the previous part, what you saw is there will be a survey system. So we need to have an entity called questions. So this first entity is that, where you have the question ID, the question text, and the question type. So in the previous part, you saw that we explained the question type can be specified by the admin, such as whether it's a radio button or checkbox, and based if whatever specified here is what is going to be used to populate the user interface dynamically. So over here, if the question type is a radio button, the user will see this question as radio buttons. Now this is a key uh, example for you to understand about data driven apps. So even the front end is driven by the data from the database, such as if it's a radio button here, the front end will be displayed as a radio button likewise. Then each question will have to have question options, such as, for example, if the question is what is your gender, then the question option should be male and female. So if there's a question called what is your gender, then these options will be okay, male, female. Or if the question is what are the suburbs or the states, then options will be the states. If the question is what are the newspapers, then this in the question options entity you will have the options such as the list of newspapers. So for that you will have a ID and you will have the question ID telling okay, this option belongs to this question. So that becomes a foreign key pointing towards the question table, and whatever the option text you want to display as the option. And if any option has if okay, let's say if for some options if you need to display special questions, then there will be a next queue ID. For example, if the question is are you using a bank account, then if the options are yes and no, then for the yes option only there will be a next queue ID telling what are the types of bank accounts you use. But for the option no, you don't have to have the next queue ID, because if the question is do you have a bank account, if the answer is no in the options table, then you don't need to specially display anything related to that question. But if once again if the question is are you using a bank account, and if the option is yes, that means only for yes option you have to ask then okay, next queue ID will point to a question like what are the different types of bank accounts you use. So those are the two main tables, and then this is a survey, so there will be respondents taking this survey. So respondents means users. So there will be an entity called respondent registration, which is optional for the respondents to register, but if they opt to register, you register them with the email address, given name, last name, date of birth and phone number. And once they register, which is optional, and when they take a survey, then for each survey they take, for each survey session, you will be recording the date and time in the respondent table, the date in the respondent table, and the IP of the computer they are taking the survey, and the email address. And if they have registered as a respondent registration, then only this will point to the respondent registration ID over here. So that is going to be a foreign key which will point to a registered respondent. Now when a respondent takes the survey, you have to store the answers of that respondent. Let's say if the respondent, if the question is what is your gender, and if the options in the options table are male, female, if the respondent select male, so you have to store the option ID and the Q question ID for that question and the respondent ID. So in this respondent answers table, you will have a primary key, and then you will record, okay, who is the respondent ID? Okay, what is the question ID? Okay, for that question, what is the option ID selected? And for some questions, there will be no option, such as if the question is what is your, I'm giving example, what is your name? So when you say what is your name, if the question is that, there's no option. Instead of that, the user will type. So because of that, for in the respondent answers, for some questions, if it's like a text box question, instead of option ID, that will be the answer text. So for some questions, it will be the respondent ID and the question ID and the option text. And for some questions, it will be respondent ID, question ID and the answer text. So in the next few slides, we will look at the relational models. You will understand it much better. And there's a settings entity to store special settings such as what should be the starting question number. Plus there will be a staff user entity with the username password for staff login validations. So now let's go and look at the relational model for you to understand better with the data. So in the questions table, you will have this data. So for example, what is your gender, radio button, what type of bank account you use. So do you have a bank account? Then what type of bank account? Check boxes such as, because user might have multiple bank accounts, so check boxes. So what is your state? Question number 9. So that will be a drop down list. And then because it's a survey, from one question it should go to another question. So say question ID 2 says okay, next question ID is number 3. Then question ID 3 says next question ID is 4. Question ID 4 says next question ID is 6. So if you look at question ID 4, do you have a bank account? Then what is question number 6? That is, what are your favorite sports? So then question number 5 is what type of bank account? So question number 4, do you have a bank account? Then so if you go and look at the question options for that question, do you have a bank account? That is question number 4. So if you look at question options, the QID column, question number 4 over here, for that the options are yes and no. Then if you look at what is your gender, question number 2, then if you look question options, for question number ID 2, the answers are male and female. Then what is your age range? That is question number 3. Then what are the options? Question ID 3, there are 4 options, 20 to 30 likewise. So for that special question, do you have a bank account? Question number 4, that means over here yes and no. But for yes option, you can see the next QID is set for 5. So only if the user select yes, you will program the system to go to question number 5, which is what type of bank account. So if the user says yes, do you have a bank account? Yes, then only you will ask question number 5, which is let's look here, what type of bank account, right? But if user select no, then there's no special question. So if you select no, based on the logic you are going to program, you will say, do you have a bank account? Then you will go to question number 6, which is what are your favorite sports? So do you have a bank account? If user says no, then you will program this so that the system will load question number 6. But when you say do you have a bank account, and if user select yes, then as you saw here, for yes you will go to question number 5, which means what type of bank account, right? So that question number 5 will save savings account, current account. So then user can select that. After that, it will you will program it so that it will load question number 6 likewise. So from question number 6, you will go to next QID, question number 7. So after what is your favorite sport, you will ask, are you employed? So are you employed? It's yes or no. If user select yes, you want to ask what is your employment status. But are you employed? If you select no, then you want to go to question number 9, which is what is your state. So are you employed? Yes. Only for yes, you want to ask this question number 8. So are you employed? Question number 7. If you look here, for question number 7, yes, no. So if yes only, you will program it to go to next QID 8. If no, it won't go to 8. So are you employed? Yes. Then you saw yes, you will program to go to question ID 8, which means what is your employment status? If you select yes only, you will load this question number 8. Then for that, you will have 3 options: full-time, part-time and casual. So you will program it to load that. But are you employed? Question number 7. If user selects no, for no, there's no special question. So then you will program it in a manner where it will go to question number 9, which is what is your state, which is a drop down list, right? And the rest, question number 13, 14, 15, 16 are just test questions, so you can ignore them. So if you look at what is your state, for that there is no next question ID. So that is the last question ID. So in your data, the next QID will be null whenever it's a special question, like where user might select yes or no and then go to something else. Then in that case also the next QID is null. And also in your last question, you will keep it null. So when you program this, when you reach the last question and when the next QID is null, you will stop the survey. But when I say last question, when you look at this table, it's not question number 6, test 4. What I mean by the last question is, there can be a lot of data here, but last question means when you start from the beginning, let's say question number 2, you go to 3, then from question 3 you go to 4. Likewise, then from 5 it might go to question number 4, it will go to either 5 or 6. Likewise, from question number 4, 5 or 6. Then when you go to question number 7, are you employed? Yes. Then you will go to question number 8. Are you employed? No. You go to question number 9. But when you come to question number 9, you ask what is your state, there's no next QID, which means when you write the program, you will program it in a manner when it goes like this and come into the next QID into a null value, then your loop, you will write it in a manner where you stop reading the questions and you will consider that as the last question. So make sure the last question in the survey question list, the next QID should be null. And don't get confused that in the middle also there will be nulls, but that null is a special thing because for question number 4, you might want to go to question number 5 or 6. So that is why question number 5 is kept null. So you will realize this when we start programming the code for this. When we do the coding for this, you will realize this. Now, of course, you can have data in different ways, but what we are explaining here is how we are going to program this system. So we need to have a mechanism to figure out what is the end of the question list. So those are the two main tables. Then if a respondent registers, you will write data to this table and you will store their name, last name likewise. And when a person takes the survey, you will write the data into this table and you will record the IP address and the date and the time where the person takes this survey question. Now here you see the IP address as ::1. That is because this data is collected in the local host, but when this is running in a live system, this will capture the IP address of the correct IP address of the end user. Then the user, the respondent will provide answers. So then this table, as we explained in the earlier ER diagram, this table will store the respondent ID. Then for that respondent, ID number 13, that person for question ID 2 has selected option 1. Then same respondent ID, that person for question number 3 has selected option number 4. Respondent ID 13, same person for question number 4 has selected 7. So 13, respondent ID 13, 13, 13 means one person taking the survey. Then respondent ID 14, 14, 14 means another person. So what is this 13 and 14? Those are the respondents in the respondent table. That is the respondent ID, as you can see, 13, 14, 15. Respondent, when a person takes the survey, you will record the date and the time and the IP address and the ID. Then you link with this ID into the answers in this table. Then these are the staff users for staff validations, usernames and passwords. The password we have put is just 123. You can put any password. And the settings table, because in the dashboard there will be a special option called settings. So then you can have any entry. We have put a sample entry called starting question for you to configure the starting question in the survey system. So we'll be doing this practically in the next couple of lessons, and the conclusion is you learn about the ER diagram and got a clear idea about the ER diagram and the relational model of this system. So remember, this is a complete project we are developing from beginning to end, and this is going to be, with this you are going to learn how to develop a real world application. So this is going to be very helpful when it comes to you looking for a job in the industry as a software developer. We will be using these references during this lecture, and make sure to look at the remaining lessons to complete this complete project. So we are very excited to see you developing this lecture, developing this complete project. So we will meet you in the next lecture. See you all in the next lecture.